part of a generation of tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. So we have the new extended intro, and I'm really upset that Restream doesn't have a feature for me to record the secret dancing in the background. We just caught a clip of, like, just for a moment with Dean, but welcome back.
I was jamming.
Welcome back, everyone, to the MSP Cyber Roundtable and Dean's dancing. There's also no way to do background music the whole show. Can you believe that? There's no feature for that.
Anyway. Put something on. You want to put some like slow jams on? Or?
All right. So we're here with David and Dean from Helpt to talk about crisis modes, staying calm when security fails, or I guess really when anything fails, right? But particularly when there's a security fail, people get anxious, critical thinking shuts down, right? How do we get through that? Before we get in there, David was just regaling. Is this a new dog or is this an old dog?
This is a new dog. I've had him for a couple months. His name's Odie, and he's 125 pounds now. He's a Great Dane. So,
how is a new dog 125 pounds? He's an old new dog.
He's a new dog to us, not to the world. He's about 2 years old.
Okay, what's newish? It's like when you get a leased unit, like from a rental car company, like that.
He doesn't have the new puppy smell anymore. He smells like a normal dog. I just created an Instagram for him. I'm gonna blame Dean. Dean got me into this collar that's like a Fitbit for dogs, and so he's on that, and it said connect your Instagram. And I thought I might have to do that. So Odie now has his own Instagram. Yeah.
So does he tweet? Like, does it say how he's doing that day? Like, I don't.
There's like a scoreboard, and so it shows how he's doing against other dogs in the area. Right now he's ranked like 136th for Great Danes in Irvine, under the age of 4 or whatever. So it's neat.
Oh, he's got a category though. He can work his way up that scoreboard. Got it.
Exactly. Where's Lily? Dean, I think Lily was like world ranked, wasn't she?
Yeah, but not. She's always like 13th to 15th for Newfoundland hybrids because she's getting a little lazy in her old age. Where neither one of us is ever going to beat a border collie on there. So.
Can you compare with your friends' dogs? Is that like
you can? Yeah.
It's like a social network for dogs.
It's literally like a Fitbit and exercise app for dogs.
All right. Well, David, you're gonna have to grab one of those Instagrams and pull it in here. And after we do a lecture, I think actually David and Dean, we need a dog off. So.
Oh, no. Odie has nothing on Lily. Lily is the cutest dog in the world. Odie is this big, goofy, giraffe. I don't know.
Well, before we, I know you guys are old friends to the show. Before we get into the lecture, tell us what's new. Tell us what's the new weather in Helpt land.
Yeah, we're going fast, and I know that sounds super cliche, but we've added Amy Luby to the team. We've added Anna Price to the team. We're really starting to take our sales and marketing seriously, and so we're going fast, and it's exciting.
A lot of fun.
Great. Yeah, well, I can see it. Like when you look at Dean, you can tell that clearly someone is on branding. Like
not enough branding. I want Help wallpaper.
Hey,
I'm noticing even
contacts.
The windscreen on the mic matches.
Got to be on brand.
All right, okay. I'm jealous. All right, let's get it. Wait, no. Before we get into lecture, we're gonna test you guys. So we're talking about cryptography today.
Something I'm an expert in.
Asymmetric versus symmetric. What do you guys think that is?
So I saw this movie and they had this book. It was like a leather bound book, and they had like there was like an eye on it. And when they opened the book, bad things happened. I'm pretty sure that was called cryptography, crypt something, crypto.
Necronomicon.
Oh, shoot. Okay, maybe
Yeah,
I'm
very,
way off.
very, very similar. It's an easy mistake to make because you see, when you're dealing with symmetric and asymmetric cryptography, you have to remember that the original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite surrounded by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way as the two spur bearings were in a direct line with the panoramic fan. The latter consisted simply of 6 hydroscopic mazzolevines. So fitting that to the ambiofractant lunar wane shaft, the side fumbling was dependent. And
All
that's
right.
the difference.
I told Dean no Googling, but he went somewhere for that one.
Reading, have you guys ever seen the Rockwell retro encabulator video? It's supposed to be this idea that you can string together nonsense words and sound smart. That's literally part of the script for that video.
I just lost it. That was awful.
Yes.
Well,
I don't think we need the lecture now.
how long could you do that for? You're telling me you were just reading that, or did that come from your brain?
That's a combination of reading it and having seen that video, I don't know, 500 times. If you went to school for engineering, you know what I'm talking about. It's a big joke in the industry. It's 100% nonsense words that are presented like it's real science.
That's awesome. I literally started laughing so hard, like tears are coming out. That was...
All right,
no, but seriously, Matt, all I know is, and I don't know which is which. One of them, there's I think a shared key, and the other is 2 or more keys or something. That's literally the sum total of any knowledge I have.
If this was wait, don't tell me, you would have won that one, I think.
Ooh.
All right. Let's jump in. Here it is, 1 key versus 2 keys. There it is. All right. Asymmetric versus symmetric. I put these the wrong direction, but symmetric always has 1 key, and asymmetric has 2 keys. And that sounds boring. And it sort of is, unless you're a crypto geek. But it enables like a world of possibilities in computing. This revolution that was enabled by cryptography. It's not just about passing around secret codes. It's what enables us to make sure that the content we're receiving is the content we're supposed to be receiving. It corrects for errors. It authenticates people, so that we know the person that's talking to us is the person we expect them to be. It's what keeps code safe. You know, when we download patches from Microsoft, it's how we know it's really a Microsoft patch, right? So there's a lot of uses for cryptography, and then of course there's the cryptocurrencies, right? And none of those are really about keeping data secret, although that's also an important use. But believe it or not, there was a moment in the 90s where it was not clear if this tool, cryptography, was going to be allowed in the public domain. It was something that governments around the world were actively trying to ban. And they lost, thanks to the F and some other people that worked really hard to make sure it stayed free. But I'm going to jump in here. So asymmetric, sometimes referred to as shared key. Again, I have this backwards. Sorry. Asymmetric, sometimes referred to as public key encryption, and symmetric, sometimes referred to as shared key or secret key encryption. I'm sure that this one's correct though. Symmetric key encryption. So 1 key. You take some plain text or some unencrypted data. You use the key and a cipher, which is sort of like the lock that the key goes in, and you encrypt the data, the document, the whatever, and then it's totally unreadable by anyone that doesn't have the key. Keep the key safe. The data doesn't have to be as safe. When you want to look at the data, you then use that key, you decrypt the data, and then you get the same information back again on the end. That's what most people think of when they think of as cryptography. That's I think this is common knowledge. Now, symmetric encryption has basically just one use: keeping data secret, confidentiality. The strength of symmetric encryption is that if you have a strong cipher, which is the algorithm you use that key on to scramble the data, if that scrambling algorithm is strong and your key is also strong and it remains secret, the encrypted data is unreadable and it's legally unreadable. In fact, if you lose encrypted data, that is, like you leave it on a bus, right? It's downloaded by hackers. If they do not have access to your keys, if the cryptography is strong, it is legally considered not to have been leaked, disclosed, whatever. It's not actually the data, the original data, legally. The weakness to symmetric key encryption is it depends on secret key exchange, and users are bad at strong keys. So there's two things there. So secret key exchange. If I wanted to give Dean a secret and I said, Dean, the key is 12345, he would write that down on a post-it note, and he would have that key. Great, but I just spoke it over YouTube and LinkedIn, and now everyone knows my key, right? Not particularly secret. And so even if I send Dean a secret note, anyone can decrypt it. Also, I just use 12345 because it's easy for me to remember and speak, which is not a particularly strong key. We can guess it. In fact, it is really, really difficult as a human to create a strong key, unless it's like 20 random letters, numbers, and symbols long, right? Then it's strong, right? But no one can remember that, right? So then you have to write it down, and then where are you going to write it down, and how do you pass that note to someone else? It gets really complicated, right? So that's the problem with symmetric encryption. Also, let's say that I was speaking to Dean privately someplace, right? I was on a phone with him. I'm not 100% sure no one overheard that key exchange. Not only do I not know who might be listening, I also don't know where Dean sticks his post-it notes. He just like stuck it like for all I know, yeah, you stuck it down there, but, like, yeah, I don't know who got a hold of that Post-it note, so someone could
It's on my window, so I can see it.
yeah, someone someone could be breaking into his office looking for swag, and they could find that Post-it. So that's the problem with symmetric encryption. Um, Now, symmetric encryption is used for nearly all in-transit encryption, so network layer encryption. We're talking about, like, the things that keep you safe when you're moving over the internet, right? It's also typically used in disk encryption at rest. But again, remember that key problem. Um, the most popular cipher is AES. That's almost always going to be what I would recommend. And I would almost always recommend not to use any other cipher ever, unless you're very strong in cryptography, trained in it, and you really understand the trade offs of using other cryptographic algorithms. The reason the advanced encryption standard exists is there was a period of time when there was no strong standard, and people were sort of picking algorithms randomly, and a lot of them were bad, and there was a lot of crackable encryption out there. And the government finally got involved because they just buy software off the shelf like the rest of us, and they were like, guys, this crypto is garbage. So they told
I
the
have a
whole
question.
world, yeah,
If I'm an MSP and I'm using a third-party app to do manage BitLocker, where the key management is in the third-party app, is that what you're talking about here? Where now me and that third party both have the exact same key, and both of us could potentially lose or leak that key?
that it is one of the biggest weaknesses of full disk encryption is how the heck do you keep that key safe, right?
Right.
Um, because and you have to keep it safe, and not just safe from like no one steals the key. You also have to make it safe from the perspective of users are bad at keeping their keys. Like if you give someone a super secure key and you're like, hold on to this, like for sure they're going to lose that thing, right? And they're not going to be able to get into their data again. And so you have to layer over it with products to allow you use two layers of keys, which we'll get more into in a moment, to allow that keychain to be unlocked. And yes, there's an opportunity there for key loss, right? It is the way, as a security assessor, when people say, "Oh yeah, we're using cryptography," I usually I sort of shrug, right? Because it's like, "Oh great, you're using cryptography, but I want to know how you're managing your keys." Right? That's what I really want to know.
So what kinds of standards, so you're talking about the standards here, but what types of things do those standards define? And if there's a standard, why wouldn't you be able to, reverse engineer into some number of variables?
So the thing about symmetric encryption is there's this secret part that gets plugged into the algorithm. And without that secret part, it's mathematically impractical to decode the data. So as long as you can keep the key safe with normal everyday computers, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but with normal everyday computers, and by everyday computers, I mean all the computers you've ever heard of, right? um, Owned by anyone, even supercomputers, right? They can't crack this encryption, right? Particularly if it's that strong AES encryption. It's like 256-bit AES. No one's getting into that, right? But the where you store your key is the big problem, and it's just as bad of a problem as where you store your password. And we just we've been fighting 15 years of how do we keep our passwords safe, and basically we lost that battle, right? We don't trust passwords, right? And so for the same reason we don't trust passwords, symmetric encryption is problematic. Um, so I'm going to talk about asymmetric. Um, Asymmetric's a little more complicated. We take in many ways, more sophisticated algorithm or a more sophisticated math, um, and we um, typically we use a random number. And this is it solves the problem of people choosing stupid keys. First of all, no one's going to choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because hopefully we've got a really strong random number generator that creates those keys. And typically the random number generators are goodish. And so people aren't choosing bad public keys. They're not choosing bad asymmetric keys. And then there's a public key and a private key, and you put that private key someplace safe. The place I put my personal private keys is on a little crypto chip, right? So unless someone physically steals that chip, they can't get at my private key.
I have a key ring. I hang it on a little hook by the door. That's yeah.
Well, at least they won't get it unless they're on that swag journey, right?
Right. I'm just saying, like,
And
key rings are a thing, Matt. Like, it's been around for a while. You could just use a key ring, like a little key fob, instead of a chip.
yeah, well, and people have the digital versions of that, right? We have the digital versions of that. The same way we have password managers, people have digital key rings. And then the public key, the great thing about public key encryption is the public key is public. Literally, you can broadcast that onto the internet and it doesn't matter, because what's special about asymmetric encryption, and I am not this smart, guys, but I am aware that there's a branch of mathematics where you guys know, like, math equations, right? With the equal sign in the middle. There are math equations that are easy to solve in one direction and hard to solve in the other direction, like really hard to solve in the other direction, to the point that we consider it mathematically improbable that anyone could ever go back the other direction.
That's how I met
That's
my
why I'm
wife.
so bad at math. I was going the wrong way. That makes sense now.
No, for real. That's how I met my
Wait, what?
wife. Was in a summer differential calculus class that I was taking for the third time, and
She did all your homework.
she was there because she was ahead of schedule, like compressing
Yeah.
4 years into 2. Yeah, so I have apparently that type of equation to thank for happiness.
Yeah. So she found it really easy and you found it really hard. So
Yeah.
let me ask this question: do you understand this math? Because I'm barely there. I definitely understand key
No, sir.
management.
That is why I was in the class for the third time. But if my wife was here, she does understand this math and she could explain it.
All right, all right. So now, what does that enable? What it enables is, um, for confidential encryption, Alice can keep her private key safe. She can pass her public key to Bob. Bob can then use that public key to verify or decrypt the data. Um, And so Alice gives her public key to Bob. She keeps her private key safe. Bob now can decrypt anything sent. Um, sorry, the diagram doesn't make this clear. Bob can encrypt data using Alice's public key because it's easy to encrypt with the public key, but not decrypt it. Alice has the private key. She can decrypt the data. And then if you pair that up where each person exchanges a public key, but they keep their private keys safe, that's called DH key exchange or Diffie-Hellman key exchange. And you guys don't hear about this much, but this backs the whole internet. And of course, you could also use asymmetric cryptography for what's called non-repudiation. So if someone signs, um, using their private key a piece of data, anyone in the world knows that that message came from them using the public key that they already know. And this is how I talked about patches earlier. This is how we know that patch from Microsoft is really from Microsoft because they have distributed their public keys out into the world. We all have access to them on our Windows computers. And then they use their private key to encrypt their patches. And they use that cryptography to sign the code. And then we download it and we can validate the key. Now, asymmetric cryptography, as I said, it can be used for confidentiality, but also non-repudiation. The key exchange is what's called intercept safe. So we can lose our public keys, no big deal. It's improbably slow backwards. So it's not perfectly impossible to crack, but it's improbably difficult because of the math. The weakness is it's also really slow forward. So if we used asymmetric cryptography for everything, our computers would not really be able to keep up. It's even forward, it's slow. Backward, it's impossibly slow. But we can use it for things like passwords. And so we can use asymmetric cryptography to encrypt a password. And that's where we get into, and I'm going to talk about another use case in a moment, but that's where we get into the applications. Now, it's only improbably slow backwards, and that's only theoretical. So there's math geeks all over the world that keep trying to find shortcuts in the math. They're always trying to invent new ways to solve math more efficiently. That's where the cutting edge of math is these days. It's not learning new ways to compute things. It's learning more efficient ways to arrive at the answers that people already got to 150 years ago. And that's particularly important in computation. And so people are sometimes finding math hacks on asymmetric cryptography. The solution to that usually is if we think like a key at like 128 bits is going to be super secure, we'll make it 256 bits just in case. In addition to that, you guys have probably heard the word quantum computing. There is this theoretical idea, and I say theoretical because I'm not aware of public proofs, although there are theoretical proofs, and there's whispers in the security industry. For example, there was whispers last year that the Chinese government had quantum computers that could crack asymmetric encryption. As far as I know, they're just rumors, but they're starting to circulate, and certainly people are building quantum computers these days. So there's always a cutting edge on every science. So asymmetric cryptography gets used in VPNs, secure email, authentication, digital signatures, cryptocurrency, typical ciphers, ECDSA, X25519 RSA, so of course the gold standard. And you can actually combine these things, asymmetric and symmetric. And Dean was joking about key rings, or maybe not joking about key rings, but oftentimes we use asymmetric encryption just for key rings, key exchange, and then symmetric for the actual data encryption. And that's how disk encryption works. That's how transport layer security works, TLS in the browser. That's how secure shell works, SSH. And that's it for, this was a really long one, guys, but that's the encryption talk. So,
I have to like undo my eyebrows. I was like so in thought here, you know, they kind of like crinkled up. I gotta fix them up here. That was a lot, and that was awesome, Matt. Thank you.
yeah, I would be neat to get that down to 10 minutes instead of 20. But all right, so we're here to talk about crisis modes, right? And you guys, I think, are experts at this, really. So, you know, the prompt here was there's this problem in security. This is a humongous problem in security, which is you could take a small security failure and turn it into a humongous security failure if people, if their critical thinking is not functioning,
Mhm.
if they're not vigilant, if they move too fast, right? And this happens when people get anxious, like in crisis. And there's all sorts of mistakes that can happen. This happens in areas outside of security too. But I know that this is at the center of what you guys do and why you exist. So I wanted to bring on the experts today to talk about this. It's both like, how do we, as technologists, how do we sort of deal with this, right? How do we create cultures that survive this human tendency? But also, just the psychology itself is difficult. So I don't know, guys. You're the experts here. Please.
So
Well-
you know, I'm defer to Dean in a moment, but
Yeah.
the easy answer is rules. You know, it's really easy to be passionate and emotional about something, but if you've got solid rules in place, then you've got your guidelines already based on those rules. You know, Dean's constantly coaching us on things like what you should and what you shouldn't say. Maybe it's a specific word, maybe it's the verbiage that we're using when we're talking about something. Like those rules help us fall back to something that allows us to, you know, maybe focus on something else, but also use that to stay a little bit calmer. Rules are for very smart people, Dean, not for fools. What were you thinking?
So that's part of it, but this situation, you have rules. You have encryption, like we just talked about. You have tools, you have rules, you have a process, and that falls apart. And this isn't an IT problem, it's a human problem. So if we go back in time a little bit to like the 90s when all the fun hacking movies came out, like Sneakers or Hackers, or like anything like that. None of it was actual hacker man hacking. It was all right, like social engineering, right? And we all kind of know that. And I think a lot of security awareness training now and just the general mood of the industry, if we were to pull a random tech support person from somewhere in IT on this call right now and ask them about social engineering, they could give us the party line about how somebody could easily get a client's, common information, maybe from their Phi dog collar we were talking about earlier, and use that to, impersonate them. But what's actually the most two common forms of social engineering? Because it's not that. It's the first one is confidence and acting like you're supposed to be there, right? That's the clipboard hard hat thing. You can walk around anywhere. Second one's getting angry. And that's what's so insidious about this. At any point in your life, if you've ever been in the situation where you've seen, maybe like in a retail or customer service setting, somebody go up to the counter and yell at the associate, "Do you know who I am?" You have seen this. And in that moment, it triggers a fight or flight reflex in that person's brain. And all the rules, you pause and you forget they're there. And that right there is the moment of risk. Because if I have all these processes and controls, but somebody is simply causing me to panic, I might not follow them. And in fact, it's why we see in jobs that deal with that kind of stress a lot. So like if you look at like the way the Navy trains people in a submarine, they can't afford to panic, because if that leak is there for 3 more seconds, we're all dead. So the only way around that is through constant training, where it's a muscle memory reflex. We cognitively cannot respond properly in those situations. Tying that all back to help desk, it comes back to the fact that like you've probably trained your team to be a little bit savvy about a user whose voice you don't recognize, or maybe somebody's calling in from a number you don't know, or emailing from a domain you're not sure about. And they're probably savvy about that, but that falls apart in the moment that that person starts to intentionally or unintentionally prey on that fight or flight reflex. I've been victim to it. At our MSP a long time ago, we had a construction client, and it was one of our largest revenue clients, right? That's important. I'm a service manager. I care about our large revenue client. They did not want to have MFA everywhere on their Microsoft account. And as many MSPs at that time allowed, we let them dictate that. They had a user who clicked a link they shouldn't have clicked and filled out a user in payroll who filled out all the information and then at least had the wherewithal to call us and tell us, hey, this is what I did. I goofed. We panicked. And in that moment of panic, we forcibly enabled MFA across 300 users. Now, you might be saying, okay, I mean, that maybe not the right way to handle that, Dean, but an important step. It's a construction company. So 250 of those users were workmen out in the field whose only way to connect with anyone was a cell phone, and we just locked them out of them because we panicked. And so even in a situation where we were maybe enabling a control that could mitigate damage, we screwed that entire company and lost them a ton of hours and a ton of money and resources and created bigger damage than the actual compromise may have created for them because we panicked and we forgot those rules.
You know, you started out by talking about how people might forget rules that prevent attacks. But that situation you're talking about where, well, actually there was an incident, right?
Maybe.
Someone did. Maybe there was an incident.
We didn't
right?
even know.
Maybe there was an incident, right? And it doesn't matter whether there was or wasn't, right? If you don't follow process in that moment, it can be worse than locking a bunch of people out because
we didn't follow it at all.
Let's say there really was a loss, right? Let's say that you had cyber insurance, and then you go out to that insurer and you report, right? But you've already done something stupid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you, instead of, because you weren't in that moment of following process, right? Instead of isolating that machine and setting it aside for forensics the way you were supposed to, you like got really freaked out and deleted it or wiped it or whatever, right? And then called the insurer, right? Later. Maybe because like something funny happens on a second system and you're like, oh, this wasn't contained, right? We didn't follow the process. The person said they needed to get back up now, right? You know, the insurer is going to come in and they're going to say, you were supposed to inform us. And not only that, but you destroyed the evidence.
It's funny you say all this, dramatic foreshadowing person. We didn't erase or disconnect the computer. Instead, we said we have an amazing backup system that could instantly restore. So we restored from a functional backup, which effectively did the same thing. We're like, yeah, we're the best. Then I called TechRug to file a notice of circumstance. And our TechRug person basically screamed at me for 30 minutes about what an idiot I was and why didn't I follow our IR plan. And if something actually happens now, we're probably not covered. And I went from being really proud of how quickly we responded to the situation to being really embarrassed. Then the client called us and basically said that they were going to fire us, not because of the fact that their employee clicked on something they shouldn't and circumvented controls and that they didn't have MFA against our wishes, not because the incident happened, because of our handling, or rather mishandling, of the process we had mutually agreed to because we panicked. And so now I've got an insurance provider that's questioning if they're going to help us. I've got a client that's mad they got potentially compromised, but is more mad at the fact that we didn't follow the plan we agreed to. So I'm going to lose that revenue. I'm not going to get any recompense. The whole thing was a mess and it was awful. And it was not the first time something like that happened to us. And it's not the first time something like that has happened to other MSPs.
That's really funny. I'm sorry to laugh here, but I swear I didn't set Dean up.
but that's the point. Like that's how formulaic the screw up goes in this, and right. Why it's so important.
This is a common situation. Yeah.
And you figure like if you're really, really dialed in and you have your act together, probably the first place that your company is going to be made aware of a potential incident is not frontline support getting a reactive phone call. Probably. But for a lot of us, it is. You know, quite frankly, it is. Our users are going to call us, be like, my computer's doing something funky, something weird's going on, or hey, like I'm going on a trip and I want this thing disabled. Like it will be that. And those frontline people don't have that deep training to know how to follow that policy. And even if you tell them, here's the policy, here's how to look it up, that's not their job. It's why it's really important that you really focus on the fact that your frontline workers need to understand in that moment where that fight or flight reflex is triggered. They have to understand how to disassociate from that, take a step back, calm themselves down, and in some cases even know when to exit that interaction entirely. That's a tiny little customer service blip instead of a massive problem. And this logic applies to any reactive customer service of any kind. You just have to be able to understand that skill set of matching that customer's intensity, but then taking a step back, pacing them back, not letting them panic you or sweet talk you, but panic you into doing something you wouldn't normally do. And then you end up in a situation like this that, if not preventable, it at least could have been significantly mitigated. And that's why David started our company.
Well, so let me just stop right there. So if you are a small service provider, and I don't know if you're 800,000 or you're doing a couple million, right? You got a couple guys or a few guys, right? You've got a handful of like pretty crappy customers. You got a handful of pretty good customers, and then you got like one humongous customer that's responsible for like if you lost that customer, you're out of business, right?
Yeah, that like 15% of your revenue or greater customer, yeah, you're screwed.
And for some people, it's even half, right?
Yeah.
So that I could just imagine. I can only imagine because it's been more than 10 years since I've been in this chair, right? In that moment of incident, right? When you're thinking about, like, I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to have to lay off all my people. Like, I'm going to lose this client. Like, I'm going to have to declare bankruptcy, right? Like, okay, how do we stay calm?
Well, and think of this too. So we're talking about relatively dramatic scenarios. It doesn't have to be this dramatic. Like, how about just that same client, your primary contact, a decision maker, calls in and says, I don't want MFA on my email anymore because it's a pain in the ass. And your frontline tech is like, oh, I'm so sorry about that. You know, Mr. Fish, but our policy says we have to. I don't care what your policy says. I hate this MFA. And if you don't get rid of it, I'm going to call your boss. Like, it can be something really small like that. It doesn't have to be, that's not yet anything. That's just a request. But you can panic, and in that moment, you might be thinking, "Oh, this is the biggest client, and it's my first month here, and I want to do well, and so okay, I'll turn it off for 3 days, and I'll file the change control report because our MSP has that, and I'll tell the guy next to me about it. Except by the time the call's over, you probably don't, and even if you do those things, what happens in those 3? Like, so it can be a small thing that cascades. It's that fundamental skill of being able to identify when that trigger point is being hit for you. And it's a lot of that is emotional intelligence. It's not tech support at all. And somebody like me, I get riled up really easily. I struggled with this. Like I had to actually go through a multi-year training program to start to learn how to not let people push me into that zone. Because my reaction would be like, let's fight, let's go. Like right away. I did it once on a Fort Mesa call with your old partner when we were talking about something. And him and I both pushed each other's button. That's how easy it is. And we like each other. That's how easy it is to fall into it. If you can't train your staff to do that naturally, which may not be within the wheelhouse of everybody, the next best thing is to find a way to put some degrees of separation between that experience and your staff. So obviously solutions like outsourcing are a great way to do that. But in the interest of not shilling, you can also think tactically about how do customers report those service incidents. So if I'm an MSP and right now I'm small, like you described, and I provide live answer, I am completely beholden to the individual excellence of everyone who picks up that phone to navigate that. And they're not going to be good at it. Some will, but not everyone will. So first thing right there, I would probably try to move away from doing live answer. I would probably want a way where those employees could call back, because that 5 to 15 minute break between getting that ticket intake, maybe by like a dispatcher or a voicemail or an AI assistant, where I read it, I understand, okay, Mr. Fish is he's gonna ask me about MFA again. He's gonna be upset. Hey, David, where's our policy on that? Do we have the last email? Hey, let's just get the owner in here to talk to Mr. Fish about that. Like, having those 5 minutes to think about it. You're not in fight or flight anymore. So when you call back, you just have that little bit more control, that little more agency, that sense that I might be able to be prepared for this call. That's a really, really easy way to start overcoming this. If you're that smaller company, you can't afford an outsourcing thing, you can't afford training, can't afford any of that.
It's the 2-key system that you're talking about earlier, right? Dang. Did you sent that like 30 minutes ago? We weren't even on this topic. Nostradamus. Yeah.
If you want to train your internal staff to do this, you can. It's time consuming, and a lot of MSPs you're hiring based on technical talent and soft skills second. So the emotional intelligence required to learn this skill probably isn't a native strong suit of your help desk, your frontline people. So you also have to accept that some of your frontline people probably won't learn this skill. That's what we did at our MSP initially. We very stubbornly were going to build this out ourselves.
Loosely coupling the reporting of a problem from the solving of the problem, it sounds like a really powerful tool. You mentioned training. Is there any particular like methodology there that you found great?
So almost any customer service training will be helpful, but what you really need, there's a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. You need something that will fundamentally teach another human how to recognize when you're not looking for the customer service cues from the customer. You're looking for your own internal cues. You have to learn what types of words, language, and tone trigger you to basically dip into that fight or flight reflex. And that takes a certain level of self-awareness, and it's doable, but it's hard if that's not your primary business model, which is why I'm saying the easiest solution around this is just find a crowbar way to separate the time between that user having that energy and emotion from your team's response back to it. So my service manager answer there is basically have a triage and dispatch process of some type powered by something that isn't the actual tech that's going to solve it, if you don't currently have the resources to train those techs.
It's notable that let's call that a tool, right? That tool, which may be a piece of software plus configuration plus process, right? Of being able to triage those issues effectively. That's going to help you set SLAs with the customer. Maybe SROs. What is it? When you've got an objective that's separate from the SLA, right? It's going to help you get a little more methodical about who's involved when what happens, right? By tiering the calls, right? And maybe they're not all simple tier systems, right? Because we have specialists, right? We've got the firewall guy, we've got the, whatever, the Active Directory guy, right? So that sounds like something that everyone should be doing no matter what, right? And the benefit's not just going to be staying calm in a crisis, right? There's a lot of knock-on benefits there.
There are, because if you start to work through this type of training with your team, and remember, until you have the resources to really do that, just buy separation. That's easy. Buy some separation, some breathing room, so your team has a chance to think. Your team won't be VCIO level ability your level 1s, 2s, and 3s. That's not a reasonable expectation, but they will start to understand why that client is in pain and why they're expressing that emotion. And that sometimes can be really powerful because that'll let you get to the result. So if we go back to Mr. Fish is doesn't want MFA on his email, well, why would a user not want a two-factor check-in every time they open their email? Because it interrupts their workflow. So how does Mr. Fish use email? What are you trying to do where that's pissing you off? And you might not want to have that talk with me in that moment, and I need to know that. But if I can, as a level 1, identify that I don't think it's actually the security control itself that's annoying Mr. Fish. It's the fact that he's being interrupted from something that he values. If I can figure that out, and I have a conversation with you about that, 9 times out of 10, there's a workflow change or a different piece of software or just quite simply a different way to implement the same control that makes me happy and removes that annoyance for you. And as a client, well, that's what you want. You don't want me to turn off security. Like, that's not what you want. You just want it to be a little bit easier or less frustrating or more seamless. Like, you hired me because you wanted things to be secure. That was the point of our relationship.
When I was a consultant many moons ago, that was my favorite part of my job, was sitting down with someone in the customer organization, anyone, didn't matter who it was. In fact, the more people, the better. And just interviewing them about, like, what is your experience in this, like, job? Like, what do you do all day? Like, how can we make that better? Oh, this happens to you? I think we can do something about that. That's easy, right? That was my favorite part of the job. So when someone reports a problem, right? How do you transition that from, okay, I know you reported this problem, but tell me what's actually happening? Like,
so
what's your actual experience?
Yeah, it's tough. So that level 1 employee that's likely doing first line at sort of a like medium large MSP, I don't think that's a reasonable skill set to expect of that level of employee. So in that case, I would expect that MSP had a system where that employee could identify the situation meets enough criteria where I either need to live escalate it or I need to make a note for an account manager to call them right back. But in a smaller MSP where every employee kind of has to be awesome and wear every hat at all times, regardless of their level, well, you kind of got to be awesome there. And so I think that there's some value in spending extra time at that smaller MSP, like I don't know, like Don Crawley from Compassionate Geek, like finding a program like that'll teach just enough of that skill set where that employee could maybe attempt to try that conversation. Hey, Mr. Fish, it sounds like you're really frustrated that you can't get into your email quickly when you're on a mobile device. That sounds incredibly frustrating. And I'm really sorry that you're being frustrated that way. That would also really frustrate me. I can't turn off the MFA for you. I don't have that ability, for whatever reason. I will let, your account manager know how frustrated you are. In the meantime, would you mind if I logged onto a session and you showed me or described to me exactly what you're trying to do? Because maybe there's something right now that we could figure out that would make this slightly less frustrating for you in the short term. I do think that's a reasonable thing that you can train that first line person to be able to do. The customer may not want to deal with it. The customer may say, hell no, I'm not doing that. I'm not talking to you. Stop wasting my time. Hey, that, got to tap out at that point, tag someone else in. But that's better than just acquiescing. Because as we said earlier, even at an MSP, we'll say keep that small MSP that has tight controls, great process, a good plan for everything. You really think you're going to remember to turn it back on? Do you really think you're going to remember to notate wherever you're supposed to notate exactly what control or change you made? Probably not. And even if you do, is anyone going to follow up on it? You're all doing everything. We just said that a little while ago. Like, just the likelihood that you'll forget you made that change will drift. And let's say nothing bad happens ever. And then a year later, another MSP comes in and does an audit, because that happens. Smart customers shop around. And that MSP goes, MFA is turned on for everybody, but you, Mr. Fish, that's weird. Well, I don't know why they wouldn't have it on. You think Mr. Fish is going to remember that he asked you that? No, of course not. So now you look like an idiot anyways. There's really no winning by deviating from that plan, like David brought up earlier. So it's teaching your employees to identify when they're being triggered to move off the plan, buying them a little bit of time, either quite literally by disconnecting them from that situation, or teaching them how to sort of reframe that they understand the intensity of the frustration. They themselves are not able to acquiesce the request, but they can certainly put it into the system. And then what kind of reasonable alternative is there right now that might reduce that frustration, even if it isn't actually giving you what you explicitly asked for? Or just hang up the phone and be like, screw this guy, click.
I'm just like taking it all in. So I knew I had the right guy on the call for today's topic.
This is what Dean does.
And I will, like, if I put the shill hat on for a minute, the reason why you see that there are so many different types of white labeling for service delivery is this is one of the main reasons, is to help with this. Because if you think, like in the case of Helpt, or really anybody who does what we do, I don't have that emotional connection to Mr. Fish because Mr. Fish isn't my client. He's your client. So I'm just inherently not going to respond as defensively in that situation. I need training. I can't, I'm still going to have a fight or flight reflex, but there's a little bit of separation already there. And there's a better chance that an outsourced team is going to be able to kind of identify those conditions because they haven't been supporting this client for the last 10 years. They don't have all that emotional siloed knowledge and relationship building. So that can also be a really handy tool. And we see this a lot. My favorite example of this we see all the time is how many people outsource their SOC, right? And why do you outsource your SOC? Because having security people that aren't your people, they don't make your assumptions. They don't make any assumptions.
Wait, I want to drill down there, Dean, because so it's been normalized for over the last 10 years, I would say, maybe 8 years. I think over the last 8 years, it's been normalized for MSPs to separate this idea of SOC from NOC, right? And find anyone who can be responsible in a crisis or to watch out for crisis with vigilance, right? And sometimes this is a very sophisticated security operations center. More frequently, and at the very least, what we see are device-based agents that are looking for anomalies, right? So there's at least people looking out for things, even if they're not a full incident response team. At least they're watching for those issues all the time, right? And the reason we do that as an MSP, we don't have a room full of security guys, even if you think you're a great security guy, right? You can't be that security guy all the time. But in addition to that, no one can do that 24/7, right? No one can do that 24/7. And now we have this other part of the MSP's business, and I think that it's the same list of things, right? Not everyone's got the skill to do that. No one can do it 24/7, right? The users certainly have problems 24/7. That happens, right? In addition to that, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, where when you're at a small MSP, everyone has to be awesome, right? If you're gonna be an awesome small MSP, everyone has to be awesome. There's another way of looking at that, which is that like anyone who picks up the phone needs to know like all the things, right? Yep. Which means like the guy that just spent like 20 years like getting his like CCIE whatever certification, or like VMware this or like Azure that, and like is like a really like level 3 or higher level like security skills, needs to be available for password resets when someone is having an off day and they're just like, I need to get in. And that person, not only do they have to be a genius of like 20 years of technical experience, then they also have to obtain this other skill set. And most importantly, I think as a business owner, when they're working out that emotional intelligence skill set, they are not using all these other skill sets, right? So from a time management perspective, really inefficient. And it's interesting to me that over the last 8 years, MSPs have gotten comfortable with and then started to depend on and actually put it at the center of their value prop of we work with XYZ outsourced SOC, right? Where do you think we are with we work with XYZ outsourced like issue handler or triaging, or like, because this is your average MSP, for the same reasons they're like, if they're small, and I say average because if we look at depending on who's counting, maybe there's 40,000 out there, right? Like we hear that number a lot, right? A lot of 1, 2, 3 man shops, right? Less than 5 people, right? Most of them are tiny, right? So how could those guys possibly how could they possibly get good at this stuff? They can pull Huntress and Sentinel-1 off the shelf and CrowdStrike, right? So I know you guys are in that space, and so I'm teeing you guys up, but I actually have a bigger question, right? Like, what's happening out there in the industry right now? Like, is this like, because it's clear to me that if you're a small MSP, you should outsource the parts of the business that either you can't be efficient at or you can't be really good at, right? So that the things
David,
that you're really efficient or you're really good at, right?
David's really passionate about this, and I'm teeing him up specifically because he won't toot his horn on this part. David didn't come from the MSP space, but he came from the tech support space, and he saw this problem in other areas of the tech space. So if you're an MSP listening, this isn't an us problem. This is a customer service problem that is very highlighted in all forms of tech support. Go, David.
Oh boy, pressure's on. I think the big thing that I'd say is that, if you go out there onto these forums and you see what's happening in the world of the MSP space, you have two sides of the puzzle equation. Sorry, the math eluding me. You've got the person that says help desk and this frontline support is 100% core to my business. I will never give it up. And then you've got the other person that says, hey, you know what? I'm using this service and it's a great benefit to me. Question that I'd have to ask is, which one's right or which one's doing the best? And in my mind, what we do at Helpt, and I know this is shilly and Dean was right, I'm going to try my hardest not to shill this, is we tee up those issues. We are that check and balance. Somebody calls in and says, hey, here's this thing. We're not authorized to do that. So then it comes to you and we apply the right priority to it. And then you can take a look at it and have that time to assess and address appropriately. I don't think I did a great job at that. Dean, what do you mean?
So to the point. So the reason why this problem needs, so we'll go back to the SOC example. The reason why the SOC got adopted so easily and why Knox got adopted so easily is, if you think of the MSP landscape as it is, it's still really a owner-led landscape. We are starting to get into third generation ownership now, but basically somebody who was good at doing a thing said, I could do this thing for money. And so they then spawned a business. And part of doing that, you need to have some faith in yourself. You need to have a vision. You need to have a little bit of ego, which I think is okay. And you just kind of go out and do it. But most importantly, the majority of people who are starting these tech support companies are not saying, I'm a great salesperson, I'm going to start an MSP, or I'm really good at customer service, I'm going to start an MSP. They're saying, I'm really great at tech, I'm going to start an MSP. With SOC and NOC, those are technical concepts. So an owner can sort of say, I think I'm great, but I can't run a SOC. I can't run a NOC. But they will trick themselves as to thinking, well, I am great at customer service. And I met a lot of you, and a lot of you are not bad at it, but you're not as good at that as you are at, bringing someone from SBS 2003 through all the upgrades to whatever we're on now, 2019, whatever the latest version is. Like, you're probably a lot better at that. You can probably tell me a lot more about FSMO roles than you can tell me about de-escalation tactics. And I think that's part of the problem, why we haven't seen this become as widely acknowledged sooner, is many MSPs think they are service-first organizations. They want to be service-first organizations, so they assume they already are.
And because they're service businesses, you mean?
Correct. And so they think that, and they confuse custom and getting really involved and really being passionate about your tech with good customer service. And I give the example all the time. I'll be at IT Nation giving the same talk. This concept all the time that, like, I'm, think about like a sushi restaurant. Well, I'm really good at making sushi, So therefore, I must also be really good at other types of cooking. And that may or may not be true, but if you don't have that minute to take a step back and recognize, but I'm running a sushi restaurant, so it doesn't really matter if I can make a great steak. That's not what anyone here is coming in the door for. A lot of MSPs have a lot of difficulty accepting that and disassociating that there's room to improve their customer service experience, because that's such a core identity of who they are as business owners and companies. And so it's been a little bit slower, but it's not slow. There's a lot of organizations that are offering things that are similar to what we are offering. And there's been a lot more penetration outside of the MSP space. David and Matt go to a thing that's for, I forget the acronym, but it's basically for the retail version of an MSP. This is old hat to them. Like this whole idea of let's hire someone else to be the front end of our organization. That's like a 15-year-old boring concept to them. It's kind of just us that haven't really gotten around to the fact that maybe that isn't the individual excellence of all of our MSPs. But I think that's okay, because it's something we can improve on, right? That's the whole point. Just like with security, sure, there's bad and there's good, but we want to see a growth curve. We want to see every organization just getting a little better and improving all the time. It's just like that.
I could just listen for another hour, Dean. We're gonna have to have you back soon.
Well, let's keep talking about the difference between symmetric and asymmetric encryption. So the main winding was of the normal Lotus Delta type placed in the pandemic semi-boloid slots of the stator. Every seventh conductor being no.
All right. Can we do a short, sweet takeaway, and then we're gonna take it out of here?
Absolutely. I think for me, it's checks and balances, in everything that we're doing, and, auditing and reviewing and improving, whether it's a security failure or it's something that we need to look in introspectively as to how we're doing it. It's a check and balance system. And I think we all should look deeper at that.
I think every MSP is focusing on some level on the customer experience. Just remember that customer experience isn't just being nice to people and being kind and being subservient. It's also about remembering at all times you are responsible for the totality of their business integrity as it relates to technology. And the more you can treat and train everybody on your team to have some awareness that also means sometimes knowing how to handle the bad situations. And that may not always be with a smile. And teaching your team that skill set and reinforcing that behavior that at your MSP, it is important we protect the integrity of our client's business. And if you in that moment catch yourself not being able to do that, put them on hold. Put them on hold. That's better. I would rather, as a former executive, I would rather have to call somebody back and say, I'm so sorry, my tech put you on hold, and make up an excuse than allow that to lead to a bigger problem that damages the integrity of that client's business.
Well, for me, and this is why I think I want to bring you back soon. I think we've seen the decade of the SOC, right? The outsourcing of the SOC, and to some extent the NOC, right? And it's because as a service provider, you can't be excellent at everything. You can't be above average at everything. And it's good to focus where you're really good, because that's where your value is. But there's other places in the business that are ripe for that. And the interaction with the customer, right, is oftentimes not something we're above average or excellent at. And it's something there are things we can do about that. So that's my takeaway. Anyway, I'm going to move into the next week's summary. For some reason, my slides loading very slowly. I have no idea what's going on there.
Dean, keep going about the encrabulator.
I'm not ready.
That's all right. That's all right. Next week we've got Jonathan Schofield. He's joining us for part 2 of our series. I was on his channel last week or this week. He's joining over on my side next Friday. So come talk to us on Friday. And see you all then.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, guys.